Hello, good evening. Welcome back to my ABFensus and the European Fertility Society. We are once again back with another topic to discuss. As you can see, Carolina Andrés is already with us. Thank you so much, Carolina, for joining us. This is going to be an interesting session. I have to say that we haven't done it in a while. We haven't explored the embryo grading from embryologist perspective, which is the most important for sure. So thank you so much for joining us. Carolina has been with us before. It's been a while, but I'm glad to have you back here. So just to let everyone know, Carolina Andrés, she is the senior embryologist at Clínica Tambre in Madrid. And today, as you know, we will discuss a great topic all about embryos. So she's the best person to discuss this and explain. So as always, we will start with her presentation. So she will walk us through all the aspects, what you need to know about embryo grading. And afterwards, there will be time for your questions. So please, as always, put those in the chat so that Karina can answer them for you. Don't hesitate. As you know, it's a safe space. This is all anonymous. We want to ensure that your questions will be answered. So don't hesitate. And now I think we can start with our presentation. Remember, it's all being recorded as well. And I think we can start with our presentation on the topic. Let's get going. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much indeed for joining, and let's go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much for the kind presentation. I'm really happy to be back, and I'm very excited to be here to talk about embryo grading, which is something I really enjoy, and I hope you find useful, interesting, and that you enjoy as well. So let's get started. Okay, so here it's a summary of the different topics I'm gonna cover during this presentation. I wanted to start off with the embryo development stages, then how we grade embryos, and ending up with the blastocyst transfer and all the new advances associated with embryo selection. So, first of all, let's talk about embryo development. I cannot continue with this presentation without starting with how embryos are created. So everything starts in the moment of the pickup or the egg retrieval. Here, the gynecologist will aspirate the follicles in the OR, and the follicular fluid will be passed to the laboratory, where we will examine the liquid in search for the oocytes. At this point, the oocytes have an aspect like the photograph you can see in the left corner. At this point, the oocytes are surrounded by granulose cells, which are cells which have very important roles within within the in vivo. However, in vitro, we don't require these cells. So after some time of incubation, we are going to remove these cells with a process called as stripping. And this process will allow us to check the maturity state of the oocyte. So why is the maturity state important? Because this is what tells us that the oocyte is ready to be fertilized. Therefore, oocytes, which are found in metaphase 2 oocytes, are are the ones that can be microinjected, and are the ones that are ready, and they are marked by this polar body that you can see with the arrow. Then we can also find other kind of oocytes. Oocytes that are immature, which can be found in two different stages: metaphase 1 oocytes or germinal vesicles. It's important to highlight that metaphase 1 oocytes are susceptible for maturation, which means that after the stripping procedure and in the meantime we prepare ourselves for the microinjection, some oocytes might mature in vitro and turn into the metaphase 2. That means that they can turn into oocytes we can work with. Unfortunately, germinal vesicles are not susceptible for maturation. Additionally, we can find other oocytes which are called atresia, which are oocytes which cannot be microinjected because they are not normal in formation. So once we have our oocytes ready, and we have them classified, we will proceed with the microinjection. Oocytes that are going to go conventional IVF will be stripped after the fertilization is done, 1 day after. It's at a different moment, but we will do it anyways. After the fertilization is performed, embryos are cultured till day 5 and day 6, after which time they will be either transferred, vitrified, or biopsied and vitrified, waiting for the genetic results to arrive. I have brought you a summary of what do we expect during embryo development. So first of all, on day 1, we will check fertilization. Our aim is to observe correct fertilization, and this is represented by the visualization of the pronuclei. These structures are 2 structures that are gonna appear around 17 hours post microinjection, and they represent the genetic content of the oocyte and the sperm. In some occasions, we can find oocytes that are not fertilized in a typical manner. We can see either 3 pronuclei, warped pronuclei. Normally, we cannot assure that the genetic content in these oocytes is correct. So normally, they will be discarded. But in some cases where we are undergoing PGT, we can take them into consideration for culture. After fertilization is checked, embryos are going to start dividing. On day 2, we more or less expect embryos to have 4 cells. On day 3, we expect 8 cells. During these first days is what we call the cleavage stage. Embryos are gonna be formed by individual cells, but on day 4, we expect them to transition towards the blastocyst stage. This is a very important point because it's where the genome of the embryo is gonna get activated. Up until now, the responsible of the divisions was the oocyte, but from this point onwards, the sperm is gonna take role. At this point, we can find embryos at different stages. We can find embryos at the morula stage, which are embryos which have more than 10 cells. We can find that the morula is starting to compact. This means that the cells is going to start joining each other to end up forming the compacted morula, which is what we can see in the image. And then this compacted morula, it's gonna start forming a cavity in the interior to end up forming the blastocyst. That's what we can see on day 5 and day 6. So knowing how embryos are created and what do we expect, let's talk about embryo grading criteria. So there are many different grading systems that can be used for embryo evaluation. In Spain, the most typical ones are the Elsevier grading system, which is a Spanish grading system, or the Gardner grading system, which is more international, and it's the one we use at our clinic. Therefore, that's why I'm the one that I'm going to describe during the following slides. So embryo grading is very important because it will allow us a better embryo selection, and a better embryo selection will help us improve our IVF outcomes. Additionally, it will also help us reduce the multiple pregnancies because our aim is to transfer the best embryo to live to a pregnancy and avoid transferring more than one embryo. So how we will evaluate the embryos during these following days. So let's start with the first 2 days, the cleavage stage, the cleavage stages. So at this moment, we are going to evaluate different features. First of all, we're going to look at the cell count. So the cell count is, we expect on day 2 to have 4 cells, more or less. and on day 3 to have 8. Of course, this is the ideal situation, and we cannot forget that each embryo is different. So more or less, we're gonna count the number of cells, and we can see a little bit more, a little bit less. Meanwhile, the embryo is dividing well throughout these first days. But of course, this is gonna give us an idea of how the embryo is looking in terms of quality during the first days. We are also going to look at multinucleation. This is not something that's going to be very definitive in our embryo evaluation, but of course it's something to have in mind. So normally when we check embryos on day 2, we expect to see 2 nucleus in each cell, but sometimes we see more. So when we see this kind of multinucleation, we know that the prognosis might be poor, but it doesn't mean that it cannot form the blastocyst at the end. Another feature that is going to condition our development is the direct unequal cleavage. I have brought you a video so you can visualize it better. So from what I have explained, normally embryos will divide from 1 cell to 2 cells, and each cell will divide itself in other 2 cells, so from 4 cells to 8 cells. But in some occasions, we see that 1 cell divides into 3 equal cells. So that's what we call Duc. In this video, you can see that the 2 pronuclei have appeared at this moment in the middle. They have just faded, and this cell is going to divide into 3. So, as I say, this is a poor prognosis feature, but of course, it doesn't mean that the embryo does not have the capacity to form the blastocyst, but we will have it in mind, and we will take note of that to have it into consideration for future embryo selection at the end of the cycle. Okay. And finally, the last feature we're going to look at, and one of the most important, is the fragmentation. So when cells divide, we normally expect them to perform a clear division. But in some occasions, we see that the division generates some small cells, cellular debris that we call. And we will give them a grade depending on the percentage of cellular fragmentation found in the embryo. Grade 1 or grade 2 are embryos which are still considered of good quality and its percentage of fragmentation within normality. So normally grade 1 will be from 0 to 10% of fragmented cells within the embryo. Grade 2, it's like 10 to 20 more or less. Then grade 3 and grade 4 are considered of intermediate and bad quality. So grade 3 will be percentage of fragmentation in between 20 and 50, and the grade 4 above 50. The problem with these embryos is that at this point, sometimes it's very difficult to differentiate in between cellular debris and cells. Again, this does not mean they do not have the capacity of forming the blastocyst, but we know that their chances are lower. So, having seen what we expect from the embryos during these first days, I have brought you a video of how the embryos develop from the beginning to the end, because it is important to know what happens during these first days. But as you know, the culture has been greatly optimized, and nowadays we can cultivate until day 6. So on this video, you can see how the embryo, this is a speeded up video, will divide into 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells towards the blastocyst. So now this is the next part of the presentation, where we're going to talk about blastocyst evaluation. Nowadays, we perform a long culture until day 5, day 6, because it's the way that we're going to select our embryos indirectly. We are only going to select those embryos that have the capacity to form the blastocyst and therefore have the capacity to implant. Okay, so to understand how we evaluate blastocysts, there are three different aspects I want to point out. The blastocyst is formed by two parts, the inner cell mass and the trophectoderm. The inner cell mass is going to be the part of the embryo that's going to form the fetus in the future during the pregnancy. And the trophectoderm is going to be the part that's going to lead to the formation of the placenta. We are going to give them letters from A to D to evaluate the quality. In the following slide, I will explain to you more precisely the differences. And then we're also going to grade the expansion. So as you have seen, probably noticed in the video from the previous slide, the embryo, it's gonna, once it starts forming the blastocyst, it's gonna start getting bigger and bigger. So with the expansion, we can know if the blastocyst has become bigger or it's at the very initial stage. So I will show you in the following slide with pictures that I think it's more visual. So as I was talking about the expansion here in the first part of the slide, you can see that blastocyst 1, it's a blastocyst which is starting to form. The cavity in the interior is starting to appear. We cannot yet differentiate in between the inner cell mass, the trophectoderm. We can more or less see them, but it's sometimes very difficult to know which kind of quality. So this is what we will call the very initial blastocyst. Then we have a blastocyst 2, where the blastocyst has already been formed. We can differentiate two parts, and now we can see the quality of each part. A blastocyst 3, it's a fully expanded blastocyst. So it's a blastocyst where the zona pellucida is already very thin, and we can see it has become bigger. Then we can see blastocyst 4 or 5. So before implantation, embryos are gonna hatch naturally. That means that they're gonna go out from the zona pellucida. So a blastocyst 4, it's an embryo that has hatched naturally and it's starting to protrude to the outside. A blastocyst 5, it's a naturally hatched embryo that is already has already most of its part outside the zona pellucida. The difference with the blastocyst 6 is that a blastocyst 6, we name embryos which have part of the embryo protruded to the exterior because we have artificially performed a hatch with a laser in order to help them protrude and to help us access better the cells for the biopsy. Then moving on to the inner cell mass, that's the first letter you're gonna see in the embryo grading. We have letters from A to D. A and B is good quality embryos, and C and D intermediate quality embryos, considering the Garner grading system. So a grade A and grade B, as you can see, the difference is very small. Mostly the difference is because the inner cell mass is more compact in the grade A, and in the grade B, it's a bit more large. But both of them are very, very good quality embryos. Then grade C is when we cannot see very well the inner cell mass, or maybe it's formed by very small number of cells. And finally, a grade D will be considered an embryo which has an inner cell mass that has degenerated cells which are non-viable. Finally, the trophectoderm is very similar to the inner cell mass. So A and B quality trophectoderms are good quality embryos. The difference among them is very small. A quality A embryo has more number of cells. The cells are more compacted in comparison to the trophectoderm of quality B, where maybe the number of cells is a bit lower. But as you can see, the difference is very small. And then quality C trophectoderm has no cells or very small number of cells, and a quality D has degenerated cells. So very similar to inner cell mass. The most important part is that embryos graded A or B, either for inner cell mass or the trophectoderm, are considered good quality embryos. So let's look at the embryo transfer and its importance. As you know, the embryo factor, it's an important feature for to take into consideration for implantation, but it's not the only one. And we always say there are 5 important aspects to have in mind. One is the embryo factor, but we have to have in mind that the uterine factor can also affect implantation, such as anomalies at the anatomy, difficult access to the cavity. Also, the endometrium, if we have an altered endometrium, the chances of implantation are gonna be lower, even though we have a very nice embryo. Immunology and hematology as well. So, why would we transfer a blastocyst instead of a day 3 embryo? Well, a few years ago, day 3 transfer was usually performed, and maybe nowadays some laboratories still carry out day 3 transfer. But nowadays, the advances in the technology and the culture have greatly advanced, and the embryo culture has been established, as well as the culture medium has been improved. So this has allowed us to extend the culture, which helps us synchronize better the moment of the transfer with the moment of the embryo. We know that the embryo has to be at blastocyst stage at the uterus, at the uterine cavity, in order to have higher chances of implantation. So that's why it's the moment to transfer. Once we have our endometrium ready and we have the embryo ready, I cannot end this section without mentioning the electronic witnessing system. As at Tambre, we have incorporated the AI witness, which minimizes the errors and makes us have more control of the process. So in the moment of the transfer, the patient will bring the card, which is labeled with their name, and the embryo will be labeled with the same name. So only we could transfer at that moment an embryo which is labeled with the same name as the card. So to finish off, I would like to talk about the latest advances in embryo selection. So as I have mentioned, the culture has been improved. And this has been improved not only by the culture medium, but also thanks to the incubators we use nowadays. We have incorporated to our routine time-lapse incubators. These incubators allow us constant monitorization of the embryos, avoiding unnecessary embryo manipulation. Before, we had to take embryos out from the incubator, evaluate them, and put them inside. Now, the incubator is going to take pictures each 5 minutes, and we can have a video recorded where we can evaluate how the embryo is developing, having a constant environmental condition without altering any of the culture conditions. Additionally, we have lately incorporated at our laboratory AI tools, artificial intelligence tools, which allow us to select better or do a better selection with the embryos. So these kind of tools helps us select the best embryo because it evaluates the morphokinetic events that take place during the development. That means that it not only evaluates the aspect of the embryo, but also the velocity at which it's dividing. So this helps us take better decisions in order to transfer the best embryo first that has the best score. So the AI tool will provide us with a potential of implantation score that together with our evaluation, we can use to select the best embryo for the transfer, and therefore the one that has higher chances of implantation. So after all this presentation, the most important points I would like you to take home are that embryo grading is important to perform a good embryo selection. This good embryo selection will allow us to increase the success rates. But of course, as I have said, implantation is affected by many factors, not only the embryo, that have to be taken in mind. A personalized approach is necessary for every case, and of course, an experienced team of embryologists is key to the process of embryo selection. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you have enjoyed this talk, and I'll be open to any questions you might have.
Excellent. Thank you so much indeed a lot. We are definitely really looking forward to helping out with those. Let me just read the first question from Anna with some information. Let me show you this briefly as well, so you have you see it and know what we mean here. So out of 25 eggs, I only got 2 day 5 blastocysts. One is graded 3B and the other is 5C. The clinic has said that if the 3B doesn't work, we should use the 5C. I understand that the chances of pregnancy are lower with it, but what I'm wondering is, if a pregnancy does occur, is there an increased risk of the baby developing diseases or disabilities due to the blastocyst being graded 5C?
Okay, yes, so embryos graded C have chances of implantation. The chances are lower, so that's something to have in mind towards the transfer. But once the embryo has implanted, initially there shouldn't be any problem throughout the pregnancy.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
They transfer grade C embryos in some cases, and they have led to pregnancies.
Healthy pregnancies as well, right?
Yeah.
Healthy babies.
Yeah, healthy pregnancies. Yeah.
So you can be assured a little bit more, I think, with that. So thanks a lot. And if you have anything else you wish to add, you know what to do. And we will go for the question. Next one that we have is here. Would sperm quality have an impact on the number and quality of blastocysts, even where ICSI was done?
Yes. So this is something that can affect, and actually when we see that embryos stop from day 3, day 4 onwards, we know that probably there's something within the sperm sample that is affecting our embryo development. So yes, indeed, ICSI is carried out in male factor cases. It's mostly indicated in these cases, but sometimes there's something intrinsic with the sample that can affect, for example, fragmentation. We can see that will affect our blastocyst arrival rate for sure.
Okay, thank you. And next question from Judy, short one. So what if we want to transfer 3 embryos?
Well, in Spain, we don't recommend this kind of transfers. Of course, each individual case and scenario will be taken into account in each clinic. But from our point of view, we don't recommend this due to the risk of the risks associated with multiple pregnancies.
So in general, you don't transfer 3 embryos, I guess, right?
No. Actually, in Spain, I would say very rare or none. I mean, we maximum transfer 2 embryos.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you again for the clarification. And well, this is a bit of off topic, but any thoughts on that mitochondrial spindle transfer or pronuclear transfer techniques? I know they are not possible to do in Spain, but any advice
That's
here?
what I was going to say. So I don't have the experience, unfortunately, to talk about this. I know that it's an experimental techniques that are also carried out, and now in the UK they're starting to do it in some cases. But I really don't have the experience to talk about this.
As it is simply not possible for us to do in Spain.
Exactly.
We did a series on this actually, so you can go to my evidences. You will be able to find some more information. We had some guests from Australia or UK. They can help with that as they simply do it there as well. Of course, right? Thank you. And now let me go to a bit of a longer question once again. So here it is. Out of 5 embryos, only one developed into blastocyst on day 5 and was graded BB. It was transferred, but pregnancy did not occur. Another embryo developed into a blastocyst on day 6, also graded BB, and was frozen. Is it true that the embryos which developed to blastocyst on day 6 are of lower quality? Or would you recommend doing another stimulation cycle to try to obtain new embryos, or proceeding with the transfer of day 6 blastocyst?
Okay, so a transfer of a day 6 blastocyst is completely viable. We will consider it as good quality. It's a great BB, it's a good quality embryo. It is true that we normally try to prioritize day 5 blastocysts because they have reached before the blastocyst stage, but there's no reason why we shouldn't use these embryos for a transfer.
Okay, so you can again feel a little bit more encouraged, I hope. So thank you a lot for that. Fabia has another question here. I will again show it to you. We have a euploid day 6C embryo. It is our only euploid embryo. What are the realistic chances of this embryo? What does the C plus stand for exactly?
Okay, so as this is the Elsevier grading system, I haven't come across it very much, so I don't know it as well as the grading system we use at the clinic. What I must say is that on the one side, at least we know it's a euploid embryo, so that's great. Concerning the quality, as I mentioned, grade C embryos have chances of implanting. And from what I know, I don't know very much about Elsevier, but from what I know, their grade C, it might be like a grade B from my evaluation, but a lower quality. So maybe it's not that bad quality embryo, but of course if it's your only euploid embryo and that's what you have frozen and your clinic has decided to go ahead in the biopsy, that's because they consider they have chances of implanting. So I think it's good to...
Okay. Thank you. There are some similar questions, so let me go straight to that and we will go back to some other ones because they're about transferring 2 embryos. So is it possible? You've mentioned that as well.
Yes. So we do transfer 2 embryos, but of course under individual consideration. So each case is unique, and we believe in discussing each case individually. So of course we can do it. We recommend only transfer 1 embryo. It's our policy, but of course, given each individual situation, you can discuss with the doctor and she will take it into consideration, having also the medical history. That's also important to have in mind when considering these kind of transfers.
So it's always about, personalized treatment, personalized. You definitely need to talk to the patient before making that final decision, right?
Definitely.
Right. Crystal clear. That's why I showed you the next question, as those were very, very similar, of course. How about embryo glue? Is it helpful for implantation?
Yes, so the studies are very diverse. So there are studies which show that it helps a lot. Other studies have not shown differences. Again, it depends on each patient, and I think that within the IVF procedures, there are treatments that are gonna be great for a certain group of patients, and other treatments that maybe don't work as well. So I think that in this sense, your clinic will have the experience with this kind of media, and will be able to recommend you much better in your specific case if it's something that's gonna help or not.
Okay, I didn't get that. So basically, do you use embryo glue at your clinic?
We use it sometimes, so we don't
Okay.
use it routinely. Yes, we use our own transfer medium, and in some cases where maybe there is a history of failure of implantation, we consider using another type of media.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for the clarification here.
Sorry, yes, maybe I didn't make myself clear.
Yeah, sure. Just to be sure how it works. And there is another question. Let me show you regarding to embryo transfers. But here it says, I read that it is possible to implant 2 different stage embryos. Do you do it? For example, one blastocyst, right? And in this case, one late morula.
I mean, if it's possible, of course, we can freeze 2 embryos different and transfer, but I don't think that would increase the chances of implantation. So I would more recommend maybe leaving them or defrosting the morula or thawing the morula, leave it and in culture to see if it arrives to blastocyst stage and then transfer at blastocyst instead of transferring 2 embryos of different stages.
Okay, again, makes sense. Thanks a lot. Now we'll go for a different question here. So my husband, 15 years after chemotherapy for testicular cancer, currently has oligosteinoteratospermia. He has 1 testicle, and we found only 5 sperm cells in the ejaculate. What would you suggest we do to obtain more sperm cells in the next cycle? How would you prepare the sample? Would you centrifugate it or use another method? Would you consider performing micro-TZ?
Okay, so maybe the part of the micro TC, that's something that the doctor or a urologist must consider, because these kind of techniques is beneficial to a group of patients. So maybe he will be able to let you know if it's in your case, it's gonna be helpful or not. But regarding the sperm sample, anytime we see that there are sperm in the sample, what we do at our clinic is we centrifuge and concentrate the sample in order to reduce the volume, and in this way increase the chances of finding viable sperm.
Okay, thank you once more. And let me go to another question. Lots of those. Thank you. Keep them coming, of course. We are here for it. What are the risks with PGT testing on embryos?
Okay. So in terms of the PGT, the risks are, first, we have to take into account that it's an invasive procedure. So that means that when we perform the PGT, maybe there's a group of embryos that may not survive to the procedure itself. That's why it's very important to do a very good embryo selection. Embryos of good quality have more probability of undergoing this procedure without being affected and not compromising their quality. But once the biopsy is done, then the next risk that we will have is that we would end up with not having embryos to transfer. But I think that is beneficial, because we will know that those embryos are not viable, and therefore that the chances of implanting or that there's a miscarriage are higher if we would have implanted them without the PGT. So I wouldn't say it's a risk itself, but of course I know that's something that affects.
Okay, sure. And how about this question? An embryo with good grading could result in a non-viable embryo after PGT test?
Exactly. So embryo grading is not related with the genetic content of the embryo. So I always say this to our patients. A good quality embryo will assure us that the embryo is gonna be viable during the PGT procedure, the freezing and the thawing, but it's not related with the genetic content. So we can see beautiful embryos that are aneuploid and that we have to discard.
Okay, thank you once again. What is the best way to freeze embryos? How many embryos per straw?
Okay, so at our clinic, we perform vitrification, and I think I can say that in most clinics they will vitrify embryos, which is a very rapid freezing of the embryo, and that assures a high viability of the embryo at the thawing procedure. Since we transfer only one embryo per time, we recommend just freezing one embryo per straw, because we are only gonna transfer one embryo. But of course, that will depend on each policy. We can transfer two embryos in a straw without any, transfer vitrify two embryos in a straw without any problem.
Okay, thank you once again. Thorough answer, and let's have a look. More questions are coming. I will show you some nearly 40 endometriosis, Hashimoto under successful treatment with thyroxine. Ovarian reserve is low. At the moment, I'm looking for my next stimulation. We have 4-day 5 blastocysts from 2 stimulation, which had already had been biopsied, I believe. Yeah, and frozen now. How many blastocysts will I need to have a realistic chance for pregnancy in a healthy child? Anything you can advise?
This is unfortunately something it's very difficult to know, because each case it's different, and it's very difficult to know the chances of or the number of embryos we would need in each case. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, I cannot answer to the question, because it's very difficult to know. Each case is different, but of course, given the age factor, we know that as much embryos as we have, the higher chances we have to have a euploid embryo.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And can you explain cases in which patients had no success with 2 or more PGT-A tested embryos, separate transfers, and then they eventually went on to have a successful pregnancy with a non-PGT-A embryo?
This is a good question.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Sure.
we see this kind of cycles, and maybe in the second in that last transfer, they were lucky to transfer the euploid embryo.
Okay, that's unfortunately something we cannot be sure for 100%, right? Okay,
Yes,
let me just show you the next one right here. Some more information. Some 38 of 39. AMA 6.1 picamos. We just got one embryo which started off looking not so good, showing fragmentation. However, by day 5, became a grade 5BA. It was negative. In your opinion, would it have been a viable as it got better, which is unusual? Normally starts off good or deteriorating, not getting better. So unusual. Any thoughts as to why? Any thoughts as to how to improve this and what to do next?
yes. So here, as I said, we see embryos with high fragmentation that lead to blastocysts of great quality. But of course, if the embryo was not tested for PGT, that is something to have in mind. So we know that from 36 years onwards, the egg quality starts to decrease, and that will affect and compromise the genetic status of the embryo. So maybe what we have seen here, it's not only the embryo quality or from what it comes, but the genetic content within the embryo that maybe it was not correct, and that's why we didn't see viable pregnancy.
Okay, thank you. Belinda has another question here. So, has your clinic ever done a day three transfer, the day three embryo transfer, and then allowed another embryo to continue to grow to day 5, and then do that transfer also on day 5? So basically, 2 transfers 2 days apart. So to avoid the risk of losing both embryos if trying to push to day 5.
So we haven't done this kind of procedure. In some cases, but very, very limited number, we have transferred maybe one embryo day 3 because the patient wanted to go ahead with that and left the rest of the embryos until day 5. But then on day 5 they were frozen. We didn't transfer again. However, this is not our routine procedure. Our recommendation is to go ahead with all the embryos until day 5 because this will allow us a better selection. So as we know, not all embryos are gonna form blastocysts on day 5. So the long culture itself will allow us to do a better selection of the embryos, transferring only those which have the capacity to implant and avoiding transfers that are not going to be fruitful.
Okay, thank you so much. Again, let's have a look. So you mentioned you use another media instead of embryo glue sometimes. Which media is that? What determines which media to use?
So I think the media used at each clinic, I mean, each laboratory is going to have their own media standardized in terms of all the culture is going to be optimized for that culture media. So the one we use is the one we routinely use for culture our embryos, but it can be for each laboratory their own specialized culture media, and it's not that ours is better than others. I think the most important part here is that the culture, the embryo culture, is optimized for the media we're gonna use for the transfer, or well, for the culture itself, and then for the transfer. I don't know if I have explained myself.
It's clear. I think that if if there's something that you would like to add, go ahead. Okay, type this in. We do have time to answer your questions. And there are like 2 questions on assisted hatching. What's your opinion on assisted hatching? Is it helpful?
Yeah. So assisted hatching for PGT is helpful because it helps us access better to the embryo to perform the biopsy. But performing assisted hatching itself just to optimize implantation, it's something that's not very demonstrated. So in the literature, the articles and studies have published that are published are very diverse. There are articles which have seen that might help in frozen embryo transfers. Other articles are not clear. Our own investigation at our clinic did not show any differences in performing assisted hatching or not. So again, this is a question of an individualized approach. Maybe a patient with a zona pellucida that's very thick, we can consider doing an assisted hatching to help embryos pop and come out for the transfer. But it's not something we would apply for all the patients.
Okay, thank you. I believe again that was useful and helpful and clear. Does ICSI produce better embryos?
No. So the difference in between conventional IVF and ICSI is basically the indication for each case, but the embryos generated in both cases are equally of good quality.
Okay, short question, short answer, but I think again that was clear. How about dual steam? How does it affect or not affect the quality of embryos?
We have initially, we have not seen any differences. We have noticed that maybe in some cases, the second stimulation is a bit better in oocyte recovery than the first one. But of course, this might change from one patient from another. And what we can read in the literature is that initially there are no differences among stimulations.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Let me just show you. Okay, would you recommend 2 to 5 days of abstinence before sperm pre-levelment will give better quality, and if so, why?
Yes, so well, normally at our clinic, yes, we recommend in between 3 to 5, 2 to 4 days of abstinence, because in this way we avoid oxidative stress that might be generated if the days of abstinence is longer. And if it's shorter, then we avoid losing sperm that could be used for the treatment. So that's why this intermediate timing.
Okay, I hope that again helped. And let me have a look. Some more questions I think are coming up, but in the meantime, we did receive this one. So what's your preference with male factor using ICSI, PICSI, or MC?
Okay, so as at our clinic, we only use ICSI. Then the PICSI, we use it differently, but we use a similar technique. It's a medium that helps us select the sperm with high DNA fragmentation. And we have seen it something that helps in those cases. So again, I think I repeat myself a lot, but it's very important to have in mind that each case is individual. And of course, ICSI has been developed for male factor cases, and the PICSI technique, or the sperm slow medium in our case, it's going to help a certain group of patients with fragmentation to allow us to do a better sperm selection.
Okay, thank you so much. I do believe that it was helpful. It's true, it's all individualized, so therefore there's nothing else we can sometimes change here, right? So this is perfectly fine, of course. Thank you so much indeed. So lots of questions, so on different topics, I would say as well. So thanks a lot. We still have a few minutes, so if you want to ask anything else, go ahead, type this in. And the question from Fabia here is, we had 5 good-looking day 3 embryos, but only one made it to day 5. What can be the reason?
There are many things that could affect, but of course, this is something we see. We know, as I said, embryo culture until day 5 allows us a better selection of the embryos. So when we see that we only have one blastocyst from 5, we know that maybe there's something that can be affecting the reason. There are different things that I don't know from the question that we should have in mind. Maybe the egg quality is compromised, the age of the egg. Is there something in the sperm that can be affecting? So there are different factors that have to be taken in mind to understand if this is normal or not. We know from our experience that more or less we expect like 50% of the oocytes that were correctly fertilized to arrive at blastocyst stage. But of course, this is average. And we have some patients which have lower arrival rate and others which have higher. So those where we see lower arrival rates, we have to look more deep into each case.
Okay, thank you a lot again for that. Next question is here. Let me just show you. So I'm going for embryo transfer with donated eggs. It remains only 1 or 3, I think. All 3 blastocysts were with my husband's sperm. Is it necessary to PGT-A tested? In the beginning, I have tried 5 times in different clinics with my own eggs, but no success.
Okay. So again, it depends on the male factor. In some cases of male factor, PGT is indicated, but mostly PGT will be indicated taking into consideration age, um, the age factor. So here, since we are using donor eggs, initially it wouldn't be recommended, but as I say, we cannot forget the male factor. At the end, the embryo is formed by the egg and the sperm, and it's something we have to have in mind. So if there's something compromised on that side, maybe it should be recommended.
Okay, again, this is individual, but basically, so this is not like a standard, right? So PGTA is not recommended for all egg donation cycles, for example, right? Only if there's
No,
a specific,
exactly.
yeah, okay. Then that, again, thank you so much for yet another question and answer. I do believe it was useful for you. Let me have a look. Belinda, I would like to know what can cause poor fertilization when you're using ICSI, like having two pronuclei. What causes this?
Okay, so poor fertilization can be associated again with male factor as well if it's not approached correctly, or that the oocyte quality might be compromised. So the two pronuclei is what we expect to observe in a correct fertilization. If we see other kinds of fertilization, we must suspect of an egg quality which is compromised.
Okay, thank you. Let me just show you this. So does taking the pill for 14 days prior to an IVF cycle really help with having more oocytes at the same size?
So this is more a medical question that unfortunately I don't have the capacity to answer. I think a doctor will be much better than I do. I'm sorry.
Crystal clear. Sure, not a problem at all. Thanks for putting that. We are always able to forward this as well
Of course.
to the team, and I'm sure they will be
Yes, yes, they will be
happy to.
happy to help. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay, sorry, just need to mark this as a question just to have it here. So if you implant two embryos and perform a test later, a few weeks later, and one of them is not good euploid, can you abort one embryo and keep the healthy one?
Again, very difficult question to answer for me. The medical team, which we will be able to approach it much better than I do. I suppose it's difficult to know which embryo is the healthy one at first, and how possible is that. So the medical team will be able to help you much better.
Sure. Thank you. Let me just have a look if we have, okay, question, sorry, short question. Fresh or frozen embryo transfer?
Again, depends on each individual case. So it has been seen that the frozen embryo transfer works very good as a fresh embryo transfer. The studies have shown that there are studies that seem to have shown that frozen embryo transfers work better, but I think they are conditioned because most of the frozen embryo transfer come from PGT, and we're doing again an extra selection of the embryo. So I think what's important is that we have a good endometrium that looks good, that has been prepared well. Once we have that, either freshest or transfer is good.
All right, thank you. Chris, thanks a lot for that. And next question. So PGTA 24, how does it work? Is it as effective in terms of result compared to standard PGTA?
Yes, I mean, the procedure is the same. The only difference is that when we send the cells, the laboratory will process them faster, and we will have the result the next day instead of 15 days. So it's true, we avoid freezing the embryo. The embryo is going to left in culture. So that means that we could have the risk that it will not survive during that day, but that's like very small. So at the end, the only difference is timing. Instead of waiting for the result 15 days, we're gonna have it, or 15 or whatever, depends on the laboratory. It will arrive sooner.
Okay, that again, thanks a lot for this. Age limit in Spain, if you can remind us, I do believe that we can answer this question. ICSI, to be exact, but I think
Yes.
we can answer that.
So yeah, so the age limit for a treatment is around 50 maximum.
Okay, this is the case for IVF with Onyx as well as egg donation, right? Just to clarify, this
Yeah,
is
yes. I mean, obviously, as the age increases, the probability of having a good number of eggs is lower, and each case has to be considered. But yes, for egg donation or own treatment.
I'm asking just because there is a question actually. Have you ever seen a successful live birth for 46 plus? Yeah, so if someone would like to go for IVF with Onyx, have you ever
Normally,
had?
yeah, for donors, we have seen it. For own patients, it's difficult to see because we need a good number of embryos to have a euploid embryo at the end, and normally it's very hard to find this.
So yeah, and do you remember or do you know the oldest patient you had with Onyx, perhaps, or not? Maybe not. So it's okay. Just wondering, you know.
We had euploid embryos of a patient of 44, I think she was.
Okay,
Because we
thank
had a
you
good
for that.
number of embryos, so that at the end is a limiting factor.
Okay, thank you again. I believe it was useful for you. One question that we will be slowly finishing. So if you have any other questions, go ahead, type those in. And the question from Melinda here, so what do you think of using embryoscope? As I understand, you can only put one embryoscope in each unit. Some research shows that if you have a few embryos, they support each other to continue to grow, so better to keep together. What do you think?
Yeah, so we use at our laboratory the Jerry incubator. As I say, both Embryoscope and Jerry are very good time-lapse incubator. At the end, each laboratory is used to working with one or another and will have their workflow optimized and their culture optimized for both or for each incubator they have. Some laboratories even have one of each. So both of them work very, very well. I don't understand the part of one individual incubator, but I believe it's the individual camera, maybe, because it is true that on the Embryoscope they share the same environment, and the Jerry has their own individual incubator. So that's a big difference in between both.
Okay, all right. I do hope that was useful. If you have any follow-ups, you know what to do. Okay, Samantha, I would like to know, so is PGTA recommended for all ages or just when the patient seems to need it due to medical history?
Yes, so I would say PGTA will be recommended in the cases of medical history, but of course, on the one hand, we have to have in mind the age factor. So we know, and as I've said, the age factor is going to limit our genetic content and it's going to affect. So from 38 years onward, 39, maybe we're gonna start considering, we could start considering performing the PGT. Of course, as I mentioned before, we could do a PGT before, but we have to have in mind the medical history. So if we have a patient with a history of failure implantation or miscarriages, we have the PGT is going to be very valuable for us because we're going to have more information of that genetic state of the embryos.
Okay, again, crystal clear. I believe that was for you as well. Someone is typing, so I just want to make sure that we've answered all of your questions. It looks like it, but let's give it a minute. And someone also mentioned that was a comment, and thank you. It was very instructive, so thanks a lot. So someone also mentioned, I will need to find it, but Claire shared that she was able to be a patient. She was a patient at Clínica Tambre.
Oh, nice.
So good to hear that. Some good news. Thank you for sharing this with us. And of course, congratulations. We are always happy to see such
That's great
information and some news like that. And there are two more questions, and we will be finishing. Sorry, we already answered that one, so this is the one. So you explained two different types of time-lapse machine. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, I was told the embryoscope uses individual cells, so only one embryo is put in individual cell. Okay, I think that.
Yeah, maybe it's the device used for the culture, but in the dairy they're also separated. So basically, the difference, at the end, the philosophy behind the embryoscope and the dairy is the same. Both are time-lapse incubators. Both will culture in the same way. They both end up producing a video of the embryo, and we can check the embryo development each day. Regarding the cells, I believe it's the wells that where we put the embryos, and in both cases, the dish where we place the embryos have individual individual wells for each embryo, because we need them to be individualized to monitor them with the camera and know which video stands for each embryo. I think that has cleared that a bit.
I think so as well. But of course, Belinda, you know what to do. I think that is clear, but let us know. Yeah, thank you, Belinda. Thanks a lot for reassurance. And as I mentioned, looks like that was our final question. But also, as always, remember that if you have any other questions, you can definitely get in touch with Clínica Tambre, and the team will be definitely able to help you out with any of the questions. So that would be it for today. So thanks a lot, Corina, for introducing us to this topic, because of course it's always interesting and it's not always easy answers, as we know. So thanks a lot for your time. And any final words before we finish for today? You can see the comments. Thank yous are coming.
Thank you so much. I have enjoyed very much this webinar. I think it's very interesting, and I hope it has cleared things out. And as you say, we're happy to answer more questions if they arrive later. So
definitely. So thanks a lot. We are happy to see so many thank yous and so many of you joining. So we are definitely happy that we were able to discuss this topic, and Karina definitely was useful for you with all the answers. So thanks a lot. Remember, we will be back. Actually, tomorrow, sorry. We will be back tomorrow as we will discuss egg donation. There will be 3 doctors. Ask Your Doctor event is coming up tomorrow at 7 p.m. London time. So we will talk again about another topic, and I'm only able to encourage you to join us. I'm sure it's going to be interesting. And you can, if you have any other questions, of course, you can join tomorrow and ask those. Again, Karina, thank you so much. Lovely to have you. Thanks everyone for joining, and I'm really looking forward to some more events with you. Have a lovely evening and take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Good evening.